Let's go, Matt House. Will he be the new LSU defensive coordinator? It's been reported by Football Scoop that he looks to be the lead guy at this point. So we'll see what happens. So let's actually break down Matt House. And what you're looking at in the background here was, to me, one of his better performances as a defensive coordinator. He hasn't been a DC since this game. Kentucky went up against a really good Penn State team, and this is just really sexy stuff. We're crowding the line of scrimmage here with 5 guys, and what happens here? Well, there's a miscommunication. The guy that they did not think was coming was this slot corner, and Josh Allen, their first-round pick, comes inside. The tackle probably should have picked up Josh Allen. There's a miscommunication right in here, and guess what? We get our best player, Allen, unblocked for a huge sack on a 3rd and 6. Now, why was this important? Well, it looked as if everything was covered, but the bottom line is you're able to force a field goal attempt early in this game. So, obviously, that looks a lot like a Dave Aranda type of blitz right there. So, is LSU getting the next Aranda, who will be making an appearance a little bit later in this video? And obviously, I want you to comment down below your thoughts on Matt House. And as we always do with our deep dives, we give you the pros and we also give you the cons. So right off the jump here, Matt House is really well regarded in the coaching community, in that this is a guy, and you're looking at his resume right now, who's coached at all 3 levels of the defense. So his football knowledge is actually really good. I mean, this guy really knows the game. And look, not only is he well regarded, his name was brought up for some other coaching opportunities this past off season to be the defensive coordinator at Auburn and Tennessee. But what Matt House decided to do after this game in 2018, well, once again 2019, the bowl game, but after the 2018 season, he decided to go to the NFL. Matt House decided to be not a defensive coordinator, but a linebacker coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll get to what exactly happened there in just a second, but this is a guy who's been in the NFL, and at the same time, he's also relatively young. I believe Matt House is 43 years of age, so obviously he has got a lot of good coaching ahead of him. So once again, not only is he well regarded, he also has this NFL pedigree. And obviously, this to me is the biggest pro when it comes to Matt House, was this 2018 Kentucky defense. They were nasty good. This Penn State team, they held them to a pretty good yard per play number, and at the same time, this Penn State team was loaded with Trace McSorley at quarterback, KJ Hamler, Pat Fairmouth, I can't ever say his name correctly, Miles Sanders. They were just loaded. Doxson, and this was Matt House's last year as a defensive coordinator. This group was just really, really solid. But now, this is where the fun begins. We dive into the cons. So there's a red flag here involving Matt House. His career's been a little strange, right? So Matt House had this amazing 2018 Kentucky defense, and he's not been a defensive coordinator since, okay? Which is kind of strange. So you leave a DC job that was probably paying you more. I believe Matt House is making north of $600K a year to be the DC at Kentucky, and he goes to be a position coach in the NFL, and I doubt he is making that much money as a position coach in the NFL. So why would you leave and then be that position coach in the NFL? Once again, for a really good winning organization like the Chiefs. He's been there for 3 years now, and he's turned down some other coordinator jobs. Now, why did he leave? Well, you're looking at, obviously, an interview that Mark Stoops did after Matt House decided to pack his bags. And as you guys can see here, these quotes show that there wasn't really any ice between Mark Stoops and Matt House. They wanted him to return. Obviously, you would want your defensive coordinator to return, who was absolutely positively phenomenal in 2018, but he still left. And it seems as if this was kind of lifestyle and recruiting based. When the head coach says, well, he was phenomenal, but it started to eat him up. And once I started reading more Kentucky fans' comments, they said that they started to notice a difference in Matt House's tone. And you've been looking at some of his recruits that he's brought in, and ironically, it looks bad. He's only reeled in one 4-star recruit since he's been a college coach. I will say he did find some 3-star gems in Jamin Davis, I've never been able to pronounce his name, and Chris Rodriguez, one of the best backs in the SEC, but still, recruiting just isn't his forte. Let's dive a little deeper, okay? Let's get into the actual meat of the situation. How has Matt House been as a defensive coordinator? Here's the key thing. Yard per play is not good whenever you look at Matt House's defensive coordinator stops. So once again, he's a young guy, but in 2013 when he took over Pitt, this was the Pitt defense with prime Aaron Donald. They were 61st in the country in yards per play and 81st in the country in yards per pass attempt, which, as many of you know, isn't great. Now, it's not the absolute bottom barrel worst, but once again, it's not great. Now, let's go a little deeper here. When you Power 5 adjust the numbers, so what I mean by Power 5 adjust is we filter out the games versus, the rent-a-win games, and we focus just on how you performed against Power 5 competition, and we also shrink the sample to just how you rank versus Power 5 competition in conference play. And as you can see, Pitt wasn't good. 9th out of 14 in the ACC and 10th out of 14 in the ACC in yard per pass attempt. Pitt was just destroyed. Their defense was very mediocre. Now, I know what a lot of you will say. Well, Carter, you're always very defensive of coordinators in their first year, especially considering this is Matt House's first year ever being a coordinator. While I am defensive of it, and it is really tough to make that switch, Matt House was at Pitt. He was a secondary coach the year before in 2012. So it's a little bit different when you were already at the school. It's not you moving your entire family, you getting used to the new head coach and all the new staffers and all the new players. Matt House had familiarity with the Pitt Panthers, and they were still not great. And then as you can see here in 2014, they weren't that much better. 5.59 yards per play, 7.0 yards per pass attempt. That's slightly better, but as you can see, when you Power 5 adjust the numbers, they still weren't great. Okay, so Matt House, this is where it gets a little interesting. Paul Chryst moves from Pitt to Wisconsin. He decides to retain Dave Aranda. And there was a report that Matt House was going to join Paul Chryst and be the linebackers coach alongside Dave Aranda at Wisconsin. But it didn't actually happen. Instead, Matt House became the defensive coordinator at Florida International, spent a year there, and as you can see, 81st in national yard per play at Florida International, 67th in yard per pass attempt, which is once again not that great. Now, once again, that was his first year there, going from Pitt to Florida International. That's tough, but instead of sticking it out, he left to be the special teams coach at Kentucky. Okay, so perfectly fine. Okay, you go from that to an SEC job. But this is another thing that's very interesting. For the second time in Matt House's career, he is hired in-house to be the defensive coordinator at Kentucky. And in his first year at Kentucky in 2017, once again, as you can see here, he was not great at all. 103rd in yards per play, 98th in yards per pass attempt, second to last in yard per play, and Power 5 adjusted yard per pass attempt as well. So, while Matt House was really freaking good in 2018, as you can see, 39th in yards per play, 26th in national yard per pass attempt, top 5 in the SEC when you Power 5 adjusted. So even against good teams, he was pretty good. Matt House had 4 other years where he was a defensive coordinator, and he never fielded a great defense. Boom. I'm looking at you right now, okay? I'm about to give you some stats that you're not going to get anywhere else, okay? And it's going to make you think Matt House is an awful fit for LSU. But the first thing I want to say is Matt House is obviously very talented, but the guy in the background here, a great photo from Kentucky Sports Radio here, is Brad White, who was actually interviewed for the LSU defensive coordinator job, I believe, a week or so ago. I'm not on fire about Brad White because of the stat I'm about to show you in just a second, but look, Brad White, since he's taken over as a defensive coordinator for Matt House, has actually been good, if not great. So Mark Stoops did the same thing he did when he hired Matt House. Matt House was an in-house assistant, and he took over as a defensive coordinator. Brad White was the same thing. Now, here's the thing, and this is kind of a red flag when it comes to Matt House's great 2018, his only year he was a great defensive coordinator. There are some around Kentucky that believe the change from 2017, where Kentucky was just abysmal, to 2018, was actually because of Brad White, who joined the staff in 2018 from the Indianapolis Colts. So, the thing, and this is why I use yards per play instead of total yards and total points, is because people play at different paces. And there's been very few defensive coordinators who have had a more favorable pace of play than Matt House. In his 3 stops that he's made, Florida International, Pittsburgh, and Kentucky, none of those offenses never played at a fast pace. So, it's just simple logic here. It is easier to play defense when you're not playing faster, right? Or if your offense isn't playing hurry up, right? It's because your defense can stay more well-rested. Your teams don't have to be as deep. Overall, ask any defensive coordinator, the fewer plays you play, even with the stat like yards per play, it's going to reflect better on your defense. But as you guys are looking at right now, every stop Matt House has been, I was shocked at this. Mark Stoops is well known for playing at a snail's pace and being very conservative and playing field position, which is very favorable for your defenses. Even with Mark Stoops, Matt House played at an even slower pace when he was at Pittsburgh. And despite having favorable pace of plays, guess what? His defenses were still not great. Now, why does that matter when it comes to the SEC? As you can see, the plays per game that Alabama, Ole Miss, and Mississippi State play, 3 teams that are going to be tough, in particular that Bama team, they play at an extremely fast pace. And it's not just those 3. Also, Auburn can be known to push it under Brian Harsin, even though they just got a new offensive coordinator. And Kendall Briles at Arkansas also likes to go very fast. And the opponent, or excuse me, their play per game numbers are actually somewhat high. They were about middle of the pack nationally. Not as fast as the other 3, but still, where in the SEC East, things are diametrically opposite. Now, I do want to share one little nugget. The SEC East did gain a coach who really likes to push the pace, and that was Tennessee's Josh Heupel. Now, you saw what happened when Kentucky played Tennessee's Heupel earlier this year, right? Well, they tore him up because Kentucky is not used to seeing a coach call plays that fast, and that's part of the reason why you've heard me on this channel be very anti Mark Stoops for the LSU head coaching job when it was rumored, and also Brad White when his name was rumored for the LSU defensive coordinatorship, which kind of ties in with our friend Matt House. So you're looking at a photo here as it's zoomed out of Matt House as the Kansas City Chiefs linebacker coach. What's crazy is the NFL plays at a far slower pace. When it comes to opponent plays per game, Seattle is actually last. Their defense plays the most plays per game, and it barely touches 70. So it goes to show you the college chaotic nature where teams just play far more run and shoot and hurry up. It's just wilder. It's almost, it just is a completely different game. So Matt House, who his entire career was as a defensive coordinator, is used to playing at a slow pace, goes to the NFL where they play even slower. It doesn't seem like this is the absolute best fit on the planet Earth. Now, this is what's really good for Matt House. Let's just say he is the one that is hired for this position. Well, there is good news. Brian Kelly is really good between the headset, and he is also not necessarily a run and shoot coach like a Lane Kiffin per se. The same thing can be said about Mike Denbrock, who could be LSU's next offensive coordinator. As you guys are looking at, their pace of plays are relatively slower offensively. Now, their opponent plays per game were very interesting. Notre Dame was top 10, I believe, 2 years ago, but still, Brian Kelly coached teams, his defenses, roughly 72, 73-ish plays per game. So still somewhat high over the last couple of years of the Brian Kelly tenure, but still he's really good. He'd be able to adjust to it, but I'm just not sure if Matt House is the absolute best fit to face these high-powered offenses, especially when he is years removed from that great Kentucky year. So, what should happen to the LSU defensive coordinatorship? Is Matt House even a name that is even being considered? Well, let's just put it this way. Football Scoop is very well connected, but they're the only ones that have reported up to this point that Matt House is seriously being considered for the LSU defensive coordinatorship. And it makes sense because, of course, his name was involved with other openings last year. It's plausible. It very well could happen. And Football Scoop was on the money about Brad White being interviewed by LSU because that indeed that did happen. So, yeah, it's interesting, right? Now, should he be the guy? Obviously, I think you guys know how I feel about it. The answer to that is no. When you have 5 years of defensive play calling experience and only one of those was great, and that just happened to be the year that the guy that replaced you joined the staff, that's something that really is skeptical, or it should make you skeptical. The recruiting stuff also makes me a little heebie-jeebie-ish, even though I am a believer that coordinators don't have to be absolute ace recruiters, just be decent recruiters and good play callers. And on top of that, you guys saw the career stops, the career trajectory is very interesting, okay? So I'm just not on fire about this at all. Now, that's not me saying I won't support this guy. That's not me saying I won't get 110% behind this guy. And that's also not me saying that he couldn't be successful, because I know what a lot of you are going to say in the comment section. When he gets to LSU, that's going to be the absolute best talent he's ever gotten to work with. And that's probably true. LSU is going to have a stable full of athletes that are going to be ready to go and ready to be hungry to be an excellent defense. But, you know, you could say that about any coordinator. You could say that about any coordinator that comes to LSU, that's going to be the best amount of talent that they've had to work with. So he could succeed. He could be a completely different person. He could have a Dave Aranda type of playbook at his arsenal and ready to go and ready to unleash it on the SEC. I hope that's the case. I just don't think it's the best case scenario. So what should LSU do about this coordinator opening? Well, the first thing, obviously, the offensive coordinator is going to matter. It is more important. It is the more important side of the ball. So don't think that I'm just bypassing it. I'm just focusing on the defensive coordinator for right now. The second thing is, I just don't also think, let's just say, in order to hire Matt House, you have to wait for the end of Kansas City season. In Kansas City, let's just say they make it back to the big game. Well, that doesn't end until February. So do you really want to wait while other potential coordinators could be hired, other potential candidates could be hired, for a guy who hasn't called plays in 3 years, coming back down from the NFL to the SEC? Is Matt House so daggum talented that it's worth waiting another month and some change for him to actually be officially announced as a defensive coordinator? The bottom line is that it's not. So I would like, if this actually is going to happen, for Matt House to just go on ahead and accept it and hurry up and get to Baton Rouge. The second thing is, should LSU just keep Daronte Jones? Now, I like Daronte a lot. There is one thing that makes me really scratch my head, though. What actually happened before the Alabama game? Who was the one that said, we really got to change this defense? Who was the one that said, we can't play man coverage on every snap and do exactly what we did all of 2020? Was it Ed Orgeron? Is it true that Lane Kiffin called Ed Orgeron and said, you need to fix your defense? Was it defensive analyst Kevin Coyle who Ed Orgeron shouted out after the Alabama game? Was it Ed Orgeron himself who said, okay, we definitely got to change it? Or was it Daronte Jones? The most plausible answer was, or actually is, it was actually Daronte Jones who said we need to change it, right? But we don't know that until someone asked Daronte Jones what exactly happened to the defense, who actually made the decision to switch up the defense. I'm not fully 1,000% behind him being able to keep his job. So if that was the case, and if this defense we saw in November was 95% Daronte Jones, his plays, his play calls, his play recognition, his development, his game plan, his adjustments, if it was 90% him, he absolutely should be given another chance to be a defensive coordinator. And I know this has been the number one thing that I've heard on Twitter, and this has been the number one thing, I even did a poll on Twitter. This has also been the number one thing I kept hearing. Well, we want someone with more experience in Daronte Jones. Well, according to what you guys learned today, Matt House has experience, but it ain't good, right? Daronte Jones, even though that sample is an extremely small sample, the month of November, those were some pretty daggum good SEC offenses he shut down. He shut down the Heisman Trophy winner. He shut down Arkansas's really talented offense. He also, even though Texas A&M is really awful on the road, he did, for the most part, some pretty good stuff. Now, there are some schematic adjustments and changes that I would make to make it even better, but we'll do film studies and we'll discuss that at a further date. But still, I would prefer Daronte over Matt House at this point. Brian Kelly is way smarter than I'll ever be when it comes to football, and I'm sure he could see all these things we talked about today. And maybe I'm completely wrong on all of it. I just don't think this is going to be the guy. I just don't, guys. And once again, the offensive coordinator hire is going to be very interesting as well, but I would put it at about 90% that it's going to be Denbrock, which is why I need your help. You in the comment section. Let me know what you think of Matt House. Would you prefer him over Daronte Jones? What did you think of today's film study? And we'll talk to you soon, okay? Boom! It's a Merry Christmas. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, Van Lathan. It's going to be a fun interview Thursday night. It is Power Hour LSU. Boom! Or doing sliders tonight. Let's go.